Hey Gambit Chads, we're back for round 4 of my I Am Norm tournament in Charlotte. This round I'm playing Ethan Guo, who's a 10-year-old kid, really strong player. And wow, this game. Um, I don't know. I don't know what I can possibly say about this game without giving it away. I guess the one thing I will say before we get started is you saw in the first few rounds, I think some very high quality chess, some high elite chess accuracy scores on my part, and I was feeling good about my quality of play and the way I was seeing the board and making decisions in the first few rounds, and I had a lot of confidence coming into round 4. And so, with that in mind, have a look at this game. So I had prepared. I was played the black pieces. I had prepared a French against my opponent. Unfortunately for me, you saw some good prep in some of the prior rounds. Unfortunately for me, my opponent plays knight d2, which was not prepared by me. I was preparing against knight c3. My opponent had played knight c3. That and e5. I was also an advanced variation. I was preparing against both those moves. I had not seen any knight d2s in the database by my opponent, but immediately he plays knight d2. And okay, well, I had prepped the French. There was so with knight d2, there's a couple main moves here. Well, one of which is d takes e4, which is same as in knight c3. They take here, and then very often, like you try playing f6, but b7 in black just accepts being just like a tiny bit worse, having a bit less space. The main line is with knight f6 here, provoking e5. Then the knight comes back to d7, and then eventually here. And actually, this will be important. We'll get back to this because this will be an important juxtaposition of the game. But we try to strike at this center. A with c5, trying to play here and queen b6, and also trying to chip away at it with f6, recapture there. Bishop can come out and can castle. So basically, like white has the big center here. It's quite advanced, but you try to attack it after that with c5, and they try to support it and then defend this pawn. Else, if you can get that to that pawn and force a trade, then maybe you can get to this pawn as well. So that's a line, and then c5 is another line, which is just like a much more open position here where a lot can trade off. Because knight d2, the reason for knight d2 is actually this line that we showed, where white has c3 as a resource to fortify this pawn chain if they need, instead of going knight c3 like in the main line. C3 also being a resource. Bishop b4 is a big move after knight c3 here. This pin can be kind of annoying. Of course, that resource does not exist with knight d2. However, the drawback of knight d2 is that it kind of blocks these guys in, and so is the logic for c5, which is otherwise not a move after knight c3. It would just kind of really just drop this pawn. So c5 trying to just open things up here, and then okay, there's some more theory here. I played actually none of those moves, these being I'm sure the 3 most common moves in the database, and in fact, the move I played is not even fourth. But I played this move knight c6. So knight c6 is very counterintuitive because c5 is a big idea in a lot of French structures. We play here knight c6 to attack d4. If white does just play the very solid c3, then black it attains equality with this move e5, which is a really nice way to actually kind of blow everything open. And again, knight d2, it blocks stuff, so it's not really well equipped for an open position. It's more equipped for hammering this pawn chain. But yeah, with e5 now, in general, black is able to equalize, and I think d takes e4 here is most precise, and black generally shouldn't really have many problems in a position like this with things just trading off and the bishops can come out. I mean, there's some theory here, but this is pretty good. So my opponent plays knight g to f3, and so now knight f6, e5, knight d7. So why did I want to include these moves? This looks like not a good inclusion for black. You've played knight c6 and actually blocked your main resource with c5. So let me get back to the tirage structure. So here with d5, we play your knight f6, e5, knight d7. This is not what happened in the game, but this is the main line. Bishop comes out to d3. That's a very nice diagonal for a light square bishop with a dark square center pawns. It's got that and all of that. So c5, c3, knight c6. Now here, if you're white, you need to be careful where to arrange your knights, because you're going to have to defend d4 once right now, and then again after queen b6. So if you play here knight g to f3, after queen b6, you'll have a hard time defending this pawn, right? Because either this knight, if it comes to b3, it gets forked, right? And otherwise, if you capture here, well, then bishop takes c5, hits this and this. So you need to be careful here with white. And I actually had played a lot of knight d2, so I knew the point was knight e2 and then knight f3. So the knight on f3 actually is coming from b1. It's not this knight. It comes here. So this is the ideal arrangement of the pieces to fortify d4, and the bishop was able to successfully jump to the other side of this, so white kind of, achieved their setup, right? So by playing knight c6 first, part of the point of that is that you've actually encouraged knight f3, and then this knight will have a hard time defending this pawn later. It's kind of the subtleties of what's going on here. So knight f6, e5, knight d7. White here has a few moves that I knew about, but again, I had not been preparing for 3 knight d2. But white here has a few moves. They have, so for example, if just bishop e2 instead of c5, the break we're going to be wanting to focus on is f6. And if we can encourage this and queen takes, starts looking pretty nice. We attack this, play c3, we play bishop to d6, castles, castles. Also, the French bishop, the notoriously bad one against these light square center pawns, it's blocked in. We don't have that diagonal, we don't have that diagonal. But in this position, you're probably going to be able to achieve something like e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, this bishop comes out, rook comes in. So this is like black achieved everything they wanted, and they're doing fantastic. So if something like bishop e2, I was going to be very happy to achieve this f6 break. And so you don't really need the c5 break, right? Queen takes is one way to free yourself, and, these bishops find excellent play. If c3, there, which is all the time a useful move. f6, I believe part of the purpose of c3 and not bishop e2 yet is so that the bishop doesn't block this queen. And white here has this move knight h4 that I knew of. So if takes, queen to h5 check, this can get a little testy for black because you don't have g6, so you've moved this pawn, right? You don't have g6 because of this issue with the pin on this h pawn, right? So when you move that f pawn, you got to be very aware of any issues along this diagonal, right? This is important at absolute beginner level. This is something I tell absolute beginners as a good way to not get pranked and to prank your opponent. And it's important at this level. You move that is important at all levels. It's just important. You move that pawn, queen to h5 can be deadly. However, sometimes queen h5, there's just g6, queen goes away. But if there's something that controls the square, then g6, so something in this position, if there's a knight or a bishop, right, then they can take it. And so similarly here with king e7, there's some ideas of knight g6 check. I believe here this is just not really pleasant for black, not great compensation and everything. So here I know actually, I knew of some theory here. There's the move here, queen to e7, and white is unable to play f4, which would be really nice, actually. They could really lock everything down permanently with this, but because it takes in here, right? So if they could achieve f4 and knight back, that would be great. Queen to h5 check. The point now is g6, allowing the capture and to pin. So kind of a funny situation. So because they were pinning this pawn, right? Obviously, we can't take because of our rook. But now we encourage the capture, and we are counterpinning. So white is in danger of losing their knight. We were going to take it. If bishop to d3, then there's actually the very interesting... Bishop to d3 is actually a blunder. I'll let you guys pause the video and figure out why bishop to d3 is a blunder. So it's not f5, actually. So, okay, so in this position after bishop to d3, we can't take it because of this, and we can't go queen takes. There's a bishop. It's not f5 because white is actually able to just go knight f4 and defend, but rather knight takes e5, sacrificing a knight, but we're going to win a piece back because this is so funny. I would call this a fork. We're attacking here, we're attacking here, right? And both are hanging because this knight cannot move. It cannot move, and then otherwise, you save the bishop, we take the knight, we have enough here to just take the piece, and black's up 2 or 1 pawn. And if knight f4, then just knight takes d3, the knight cannot defend everything. So that's a nice line, and then so the theory continues to go here, knight to f4, and I believe just after takes e5, there will be some sort of queen trade, and this position is approximately equal after white grabbed this pawn and we grabbed this pawn. So some just crazy things going on in this line if knight to h4. However, my opponent, and in the main line here, just touch on this briefly, is with knight to b3, which is just a useful move. There's no c5, c4, that's going to fork you. So knight to b3, defends d4, opens everybody up, And again, f6 is like a little bit questionable because of knight to h4. The thing is, knight b3 is a much more useful move than c3, so you can imagine that there's just kind of like more resources along here. So not at f6 yet, but rather just like bishop e7. I believe the theory continues with like bishop to b5, which puts a lot of pressure against f6. Right now it's hard to actually force this capture to happen. And so what black often does is a5, trying to play a4. White plays a4. Then I believe there's some like knight a7 hitting the bishop. Bishop comes back. And then, black will support some b6, c5. White will play c3. So b6, c3, c5. And then bishop can move somewhere against this fork. So it's just some interesting lines there. f6, they don't really want to take it because it really frees your position. So sometimes they try to just like really protect that pawn. Bishop to b5 helps, although they don't actually want to trade this bishop off. So it's a little bit of a confusing situation. Okay, so I'm sure you guys have been asking, maybe, or I don't know if you, but why can't the bishop just go to d3, right? That's the optimal square for the bishop. And the purpose of c3 was to encase the bishop on d3, because bishop d3, as actually my opponent played in the game, so now f6 very clearly doesn't work. Because knight h4, this is just way too much firepower on g6. You can imagine here like queen e7, queen to h5 check, g6. This is just a ton of firepower on g6. There's no like queen f7 resource in this position, or even in this position really. So bishop to d3 is just a much more useful move to fight against f6, because knight h4 becomes, I think, quite dangerous. However, the downside of bishop d3 is I can play here knight b4, as happened in the game. There's no c3 yet, right? So if like c3, if I were to just play bishop e7, bishop d3, then I think here white's in business. But with bishop to d3, fights against f6, but the drawback is that I have knight b4, bishop e2, and c5. So now with c5, we hit this, and c3 chases me back, and my opponent actually moved their bishop again. So this is kind of pretty interesting, right? Because my opponent actually is moving quite quickly, and you see both of us have about 90 minutes on the clock, which it means we're spending about 30 seconds to move. It's 90 minutes plus 30-second increment. Only one time control. There's no bonus time after a certain move. And so here, my opponents move their bishop. Well, 3 times actually, right? 1, 2, 3. I've moved this knight 3 times. 1, 2, 3. So that's completely even, and we've actually made a full transposition, I was starting to realize, to this line, right? So this Tarrasch line, where if I had led with knight f6, e5, knight d7, bishop d3, c5, here, and then here, imagine they played, instead of knight e2, they played knight g to f3. And I'm like, that would be stupid. Why would you go knight g f3? Because then you don't have enough ways to protect d4. You need this knight to also be able to help, as we mentioned, right? This knight needs to come to e2. This knight needs to come to f3 to defend d4. Or else you have no way to defend d4. That's what I thought. That's genuinely what I thought in this position, that my opponent had messed up. The knights are arranged improperly defending d4, that this was just a blunder and not really a line. Unfortunately for me, I only play a line for white. I do not play the line. That's the reality of the situation. That is not what I thought during the game. So, and I might have to reconsider which line I play, because this turned out to be pretty good for white. There's no way to defend d4 after queen b6. That is true. That is irrefutably true. This pawn is hanging. Knight b3, there's c4, right? We touched on this. Takes, you drop a very important pawn, or an even more important pawn. Or you just face some unpleasant position here. I think actually bishop takes c5, queen e2 protects both, but okay, yeah, that guy's kind of dead. So my opponent just castles, and I'm thinking, great, yum, and I eat this pawn, and I'm like, I am just up a totally clean pawn. My opponent messed up. They put the knight here, and castles was just them making the most of a situation. But after knight f3, I move my queen. I am just up as such a clean pawn. This is like an extra one. It's protected. I'm going to go bishop e7. I'm going to go knight c5. I'm going to put my bishop here. I'm going to castle that way or castle that way. Whatever works. But look how solid my extra pawn is. I am doing so good. I am a pawn for nothing. Unfortunately, I've turned on the eval bar here, and so you guys can see just how wrong I was. This position is about plus 0.6. And if Stockfish is telling you that the Gambit is very good, then the gambit is going to be even better than that. And so this is very out of character for me. You guys are on the Gambit Man's YouTube channel, and I accepted a gambit that's very suspicious, that puts black really on the back foot. So I would much rather be playing the white pieces here in retrospect. Um, I think I was very confident. I think I had surprised myself with how well I'd been playing. Every round I put it into the engine after, and I was like, wow, like who knew that I was doing the right things? Like, and then eventually, like, I got to this game, and I'm just like, I need to have confidence in myself, and I took that a little far. And I really didn't give my opponent much credit, and my opponent deserves a lot of credit because they were a very good chess player and found a number of good ideas in this game. In retrospect, what should I have done? So probably here the simple line of takes, queen b6. So this is a line. This is a line, but it's a very dangerous pawn to take. To be clear, takes in f6. F6 here is much more playable. We have some resources. So like here, for example, if knight to h4, I believe, yeah, you can actually grab this because in this line you just kind of get a lot more. Like e4, knight takes d4, can straighten out to f7. Imagine like bishop here, knight takes. So we really just like took a couple key pawns and just grabbed the whole center while white went fishing for this rook. So knight to h4 here really isn't playable, and you're able to just really play queen takes f6. Knight takes f6 also possible, but so now if castles, just like the very solid bishop to d6, you can castle and you can keep playing chess and maybe putting some pressure here. That is kind of what I wish I had done. In the game, I played queen to b6, so I'm like, yay, pawn for me. Take. Sometimes you have to be very careful in Frenches when you take there, land with the queen. Sometimes there's like a check or a check, and your queen will hang. That's not the case here. There's no check, and there's two pieces in the way. Knight to f3 only move, hits the queen, protects his pawn, and queen to b6. I was also considering here queen g4, h3, queen h5, just because I thought I'd be castling here, and I thought maybe this would be a good defender. But the drawback of this is that, well, so for example, like let's say rook e1. I mean, it's not like a terrible choice, but imagine like this pawn ever gets protected, then g4 would trap my queen. That was something I was very aware of, that I'd be running out of squares. So in the game, I played just queen b6, which is correct. And actually, to be clear, we're still in pretty well-established theory, but my opponent was the only one who knew that. There's a solid handful of games. I mean, what, this is move 13? For there to be like 200 something, almost 300 games in the database here. 287, I see. For there to be 287 games on move 13, that's a pretty common line. So I had no clue. And my opponent immediately rattles off a3. And even still, with my opponent immediately rattling off moves, somehow I'm just like, I'm doing great. I thought my opponent was just kind of blitzing, just not because they knew anything, but just cause. And here's again where I make, I think, a little bit of an error. I play an ac5, which isn't a bad move by any means, but I kind of wish I played bishop e7 and just focused on castling a little bit more. The reason I didn't play bishop e7 is because I was imagining a situation with bishop e3 and having to move my queen and not really wanting to take this. So yes, I believe the queen is trapped immediately if you take it. So I would here have to play bishop c5, but there's like, and I was like, there's no way I'm moving that bishop twice. But my opponent, it's not like my position is that good. It's such that I can't move the bishop twice. And here I think this is just a much better situation for black. The reason a3 is actually such a nasty move is because I'd love to just play bishop c5, just take this important diagonal and not get attacked if I'm this queen. But b4 is obviously on the table here, and bishop would have to retreat. Then bishop e3 hits the queen, and that might not even be the last hit on the queen. And in a situation like this, like you can imagine, like the queen comes out, comes across, something like this, and these pieces are kind of looking right at my king. And I play, you guys who've seen me on my Von Henning and Mom Popil videos know how powerful this diagonal can be, especially with the support of like a pawn there that kind of closes it off without interference from its counterpart, right? Like if my bishop were out and about, just like on g6 or on g4, if my bishop were here and then able to protect against this diagonal, that would be one thing. But in this position, you can see I have no pieces able to help, and like a mate threat on h7 like this, there would be like bishop takes h6, and I could just like lose like this. So, it's a pretty dangerous situation to castle here. That's what I'm kind of starting to realize. So knight c5, I mean, that's the reason I'm coming after this bishop. Of course, just bishop c2. Bishop e3, I was actually prepared to take this pawn. I was calculating some lines. But it's always kind of testy when that kind of should have been my first clue that this position might not have been so hot. I'm looking at the engine right now. It says plus 0.8. So bishop to c2. b4 is coming. I play here bishop to d7. I don't want to get checked along here in the meantime. Here comes b4 and knight to e4. So I've actually been playing, I think, pretty solidly, at least according to Stockfish, but the position gets difficult because my knight's on e4, which can be good. If I castle, then I don't have to deal with this diagonal. However, the drawback, as my opponent plays bishop to e3, tempoing my queen, the drawback of this is that the knight can get trapped, right? So you can imagine like knight to d4, f3, then my knight has but one square, which is there, which can be taken away pretty easily by white. Right, so the knight can't really stay here forever. And here's where I make my first mistake of the game, which is kind of a shame, and I've been taking way too much time. It's kind of a shame because I made it so quickly. Queen a6, I was very confident in that. But here black needs to come up with the very, very difficult, apparently, queen to c7. And I never really want to play queen c7, at least I think this is quite difficult, because, like, the rook's coming to c1 probably anyway, and you're really asking for it. Right? You're really asking for it. But there's two important things queen c7 does. One is that it restricts the knight from moving, which would support f3 because of the hit on this pawn. Number two is that it supports knight c3, which is this knight's only lifeline. Right? So rook c1, then the engine recommends here knight to c3. And then just like trying to kind of support this. I forget what the... Oh, yes, an a5 is to really fight your way out. You have to see this. Because even if you play something like rook c8, then you get caught in these like nasty pins and your knight's toast. So suddenly, like, this knight is in hot water and was really the only way I could figure out to develop. So queen a6 I thought was just kind of a nice square, a little bit out of the way. If knight c3 happens, then maybe I have access to knight a4 if I need. So I thought this was fine. Knight to d4, and I play here rook to c8, trying to also, support knight c3. I don't really have time for bishop e7. If I just play here, like bishop to e7, then, I guess here f3 was going to be a problem. Engine recommends here bishop d3, queen a4. Yes, okay, this is very similar to the game continuation anyway. So rook to c8 played. So if f3 right now, at least I have knight c3. At least I can hang on. Knight can come back to b5 if needed, bishop e7, and I can castle. However, in the game, my opponent plays bishop d3, and you can see actually how fast my opponent's playing. So I could tell by the way my opponent's playing that they were also kind of a fast player in general. So that's another reason why I didn't realize. I actually still don't know how much of this game was prepped for them. I assume at least through a3 was preparation. So with bishop to d3 here, now my queen is hit. And I have the issue, again, of really running out of squares. So you can imagine here if I go like queen a4, in addition to just offering them a draw with this, they can take it, and now rook fc1. Or rook ac1. I don't think it really matters. But the issue now is that I don't have these moves in, so I can't, like, defend this rook. And once this rook gets traded, f3, and I will lose access to the c3 square. So you can imagine, like, takes, and then f3 is coming, and that would trap my knight. If I play something like h6 to create a square, then, some move like this, then this would invade, right? Like, let's say check. This seems pretty nasty. Oh my goodness, it's plus 4 point. It's plus 5. It's plus 5. I just turned it on. So yeah, that's not fun. It's not fun trying to create a square. And the issue also I was looking at in the game was bishop e7, f3, h5, and rook c8 check. I would also lose that knight. King up, I would lose the rook, and bishop d8 would lose this knight, putting that in a pin. So just nasty stuff all the way around. That white's pieces are doing great. I don't have these developed. I'm not close to castling, and my knight is running out of squares. This is ugly. This got ugly really fast. Like with queen a6, rook c8, these are a couple moves that it just becomes so difficult to play. Like, this is why you want the initiative and not to be the one defending. And so here I play b5, which is actually the engine's recommendation, just because the queen a4 line is so nasty. And I thought at least with b5, that if needed, my knight definitely is able to hop around, and I should be able to just play bishop e7 and castles. However, after rooks to c1, it's a very simple move. this position is a lot worse than you think it is. At least it was a lot worse than I thought it was. And the more I thought about this position, the more I realized like how bad this is. And I think here was really the first time it all came crashing to me about like, wow, your position's plus 2.4, and it probably has been for a minute. So, because I could not tell where I had really gone wrong, and it was just kind of like, is mostly the subtle move queen a6, and I needed queen c7 as like an extra defender of knight c3, or probably to play bishop e7 and just be willing to play bishop to c5 as well. So here with rook c1, I think just a line that would demonstrate kind of the issues of this is if you just play bishop to e7, we can turn on the engine for a moment, but just like, yeah, the simple f3, chasing the knight, knight a4, and now like rook takes e8. The issue is that I cannot recapture without losing this important b5 pawn. Obviously bishop takes would lose my queen. So like with queen takes c8, now like knight takes b5, this knight's hanging. I don't even know what to play here, like, because if the knight comes back, then knight takes a7. This is also hanging. I mean, it all becomes just so nasty. I would be lucky to make it out of this just down one pawn and able to castle my king. So yeah, just a really rough situation in general for black. I'm not equipped to fight for the c line because I cannot castle and connect my rooks right now. And rook takes c8 is coming, after which b5 is falling, after which my knight will be out of squares. I won't have any way to get back home if I lose this b5 pawn, then there's no knight a4 anymore either. So a really rough situation. I took on c1, queen takes c1, and in which case my knight is out of squares now. I don't have knight c3 anymore. I am defending b5, and I guess there's nothing here that's going to kill me instantly, but just kind of tough, right? So you can imagine, like, if I play bishop e7 here, what did I recall is the issue with that? Was it queen c7? Don't actually. Oh yes, the issue with bishop e7 to create a square is that I don't even have knight g5 anymore with this, right? So I don't even have knight g5. They can just take it because their queen is also defending. And even in other lines, there was even with the queen on d1, there was h4. So just not good, not good at all. And so rather than trying to be forced all the way back after f3 and h4 all the way back here, I played f6 to at least kind of fight for the middle a little bit, trying to maybe play bishop to d6 at some point. I could play king f7 immediately if need be, trying to swing my rook in, so that f3 I have knight g5, and I'm not losing immediately. And this is kind of like the stingiest defense. Like anything else probably would have just dropped the knight altogether, or, you know, all of this just would have broken through. They would have taken b5, they would have came on queen c7, and really they would have kind of crushed my king. This is probably the stingiest defense, and I'm happy I came up with it at least. f6 and knight g5, and so now I also have knight f7 available to me. And I think if white plays this improperly, for example, like taking here twice, then all of a sudden black's in a little bit of business here. Queen b6, that's such a relief to play. No dark square bishop, so we have some problems we can cause here. b5 pawn straightened out. Like, the queen's going to have to retreat, and then at minimum I can play bishop e7 and castles, right? So taking g5 twice is not what they want to do. Even if they take f6, I'm happy with that. Like, yes, my king is very open, but like, so, like, I just feel so much freedom in a position like this. Even after queen e5, something like rook g8, threatening bishop g7, and then, you know, all of a sudden I'm causing issues for my opponent, right? And I don't really feel like you can get me so fast. So that would be nice to really just control the dark squares like that. So takes, even if it's king f7, bishop e7, it's just so much freedom here. And so playing f6 is something I wanted to do. Not like I wanted to make all these pawn trades in front of my king, but it's something my pieces really needed. And I think from here on, I think the one thing, and you can also see how low my time is at this point, just trying to not lose immediately. And that's something I've learned, well, from Chess Mood, actually, from their Saving Lost Positions course. Don't lose immediately. It sounds so obvious, but so often when we're losing, and especially in a position like this, where I was just so down, I was so upset at myself, really, in a position like this, because I was like, you idiot, you got so confident about this opening, you just grabbed that pawn, your opponent was clearly in prep, you grabbed that pawn, you gave yourself an impossible position to play, and then you played it wrong, and just like, how could I have done this? Like, I wish I just got a normal position, and then, I could have maybe outplayed them from there, and instead you gave yourself this absolute garbage. And I was just so focused on that, and like, it took me a minute because to focus on the actual position. I was my because this position was just so difficult to play that my mind wanted to focus on like literally anything else, and just like what could I have done before. And I was here, I was starting to realize that my queen should have been on c7, or something else, or like just play bishop e7 and castles at least. And you really just got to focus on like I just got to be present. You're in this. It is what it is. But there's, I think, a couple things that motivate me in lost positions that I was really able to dig deep here and snap out of that really defeatist attitude. The first of which is I think back to every time that I had a position this good, where like I was white, I had a position this good, and every time I didn't win, it really stinks. Like the only thing that stinks more than just like losing and getting wiped off the board, as I'm about to, as is, appears to be imminently be happening to me, is winning and then not being able to close that out, which happens to all of us. It happens all the time. And if I don't have a 100% win percentage with white here, why should I be so defeatist and give my opponent a 100% win percentage? I think back to all those times that I didn't win, and that's motivation for why does my opponent automatically deserve to win, right? You're going to have to earn it tooth and nail for to win this one position if I couldn't win every time, right? So that's the other thing. And I don't know, I was just able to just kind of not lose immediately. So with f6, I'm trying to fight back. Any like yes, you could just play bishop e7 and just get your knight trapped, but that is what I'd call, especially like if you're in a fight, if you're in a boxing match, right, and you're getting beat up, that's just allowing the knockout blow to land. Like yes, losing the knight is a knockout blow, or just like any kind of permanent advantage where you really just have no chance of actually winning the game. But just f6, yes, it's bad, it's ugly. Like playing f6, playing hg5, these things don't actually like look at your king, look at this. It's so ugly. Your position stinks. Yes, I'm still lost. I'm looking over right now. It's climbing, and actually here it wanted 84. I don't even know what it wanted. Yeah, 84. Yes, it's climbing to almost +4 now. But I am not losing immediately. My position is certainly not resignable. It requires accurate play from white to continue to win this game. And it's so obvious, but just keep fighting. Just keep fighting. Just keep trying to hang on a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And my opponent, so they play here f4, hitting my knight. And with f4 is a very good idea because f5 is coming. And it really utilizes their pieces actually to their maximum. And the reason I didn't go to e4 is because f5 I thought was so strong. Pawn takes f5, for example, and then just e6 hits this bishop, and bishop takes b5 is the big issue. So this bishop is completely toast, and this is what I'd call losing immediately, because I'm losing at minimum a piece here, because this would lose the queen. Otherwise, bishop has nowhere to go, and like if I take here, also takes e6, bishop has nowhere to go, and this I'd kind of also call really losing immediately. It was not something I wanted to play. So with knight f7, the reason I did it is because I don't even know what the engine recommends here against f5. With knight f7, the reason I did it was because on f5 I want to play knight takes e5, and so I have a tempo on that bishop, because otherwise like e6 is just so strong. Any pawn getting to e6 is just going to crush this bishop and crush here. So f5, I want to play knight takes e5. If f takes e6, takes d3. I still thought my opponent should do this, but, and this is so bad. Like I can't overstate how bad this is, but I'm not losing immediately. Like maybe yes, I can play bishop here, and just like you need to find still a series of right moves if you're white here. If I'm able, if the dust settles, like if I'm able to trade queens here, I'm actually the one up pawn. Not that I'd ever get to that point here. Like queen f5 check is like so incredibly strong, but like just keep hanging on. Give your opponent a chance to mess up. Give your opponent a chance to not actually convert it. So knight takes e5, bishop takes b5 was played here, and I think, yeah, so with bishop takes b5, yes, f takes e6 was stronger. Going into this line, it is really quite crushing with queen to f5 check coming next. There's rook coming to c1, and it's a tough situation for me in general. Knight takes e5, though I'm trying to fight against this. If they could just go bishop e2, keeping the pressure, then there's no pawn to go to e6. So they can't play like that. In the game, though, bishop takes b5, it's a clever idea, because if I take it, or well, I did have to take it, but knight takes b5, I can't take again, because of this idea of queen c8 check, and queen takes e6 will be checkmate no matter where I go. So I couldn't take it again, and knight c7 is coming. Fun. So here I played queen to c6. Like, I'm also so low on time. You can see how low on time I'm getting now and how much time my opponent has. I'm down to a minute here. My opponent has 64. So the other thing, I guess the one thing I have here is that I have the 30-second increment, so I get 30 seconds with every move I make, so I'm really playing exclusively off of that. And with my king being so bad relative to third king, I am jumping at the opportunity to trade queens, maybe, hopefully not be down a million pawns in this endgame, and to just try and keep fighting. So my opponent trades and plays knight c7, which you can see gets 2 question marks. Knight c7 they played to go knight takes e6. However, pawn takes e6 is actually just very effective. And I was a little bit surprised about this in the game. But pawn takes e6, yeah, the knight's actually doing great here. It's targeting this pawn, and at minimum, probably they can play knight c7 takes. Because the issue is, I can't get these out. I haven't been able to get these out all game. Like, check, they can take, and also b5 is coming. This is hanging. Rook, or I think rook coming to c1 is probably even the most effective thing here. Rook c1. Yeah, like, what are you even going to do here? Rook c8 check can come. Now knight c7, knight takes d5. Yeah, really everything's hanging here. So just not a fun position in general when, you know, your one developed piece is incredibly tenuous. It's defending this a7 pawn, which is just going to have these two. The e6 pawn is also strong, so king e7 can also be played. Rook c1, still strong stuff. We can eliminate this one pawn, but at minimum, they'll grab this a7 pawn and probably go with this. So not a fun situation in general, but knight c7 check gives me a chance, because knight takes e6. Like, yes, the knight's great, but it costs them a couple moves and gives me a chance for a little bit of freedom here. F takes e6 would have been possible, and the knight could do some other things. So here, bishop to d6 would have been okay. It does give the g7 pawn, but, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that's okay. This rook has freedom to develop itself, and I can keep fighting in this endgame somehow. Maybe I'll only be down one pawn. So at this moment, we're actually even. And I played this move a5. Because basically I don't really regret a5 much, but I'm trying to fight because the issue I have is b5 can win this pawn, and that's really not a pawn I'm okay losing. I do not want to give two connected passers in any case. And yeah, so for example, like if I played g6, the reason I rejected g6 is I was looking at something like rook d1, just attacking here, takes, and just trade here. Rook takes d5, king here, and just some move like rook c5 or something like this. And I kind of really thought that I wasn't going to hang on to this pawn with b5 and everything coming, that the knight can't stay there, and it just wasn't fun. It just wasn't fun to play. So I played here a5, I'm trying to fight this way, and so b5 comes and e5. So I have this resource knight c4, and I want to take a3. So there's a couple things I'm trying to do to try to fight back a little bit. My opponent plays rook to d1, which does allow me to actually grab this pawn. And so trade I'm willing to make, because I make this past a pawn, you can have that d pawn, it wasn't going anywhere. A4 I think would have been a little scarier, and then you can imagine kind of in any endgame, so like for example like g6 now, like let's look at the same line, rook d1 takes, and takes d5. Any endgame, this bishop is probably going to win that pawn. It's a dark square pawn. And it's not really the color we're going for here. I can't attack these guys. They're on the light squares. And this pawn seems to not be doing so hot. And this b pawn seems quite good. But I was able to get a little bit of counterplay here with rook d1. I was able to grab a3. I'm playing just off the increment here and takes d5. You can see how fast, though, my opponent's playing. So my opponent is an exceptionally smart kid. Exceptionally brilliant. I mean, he's found a number of good ideas in this game. But he's still a kid. And I think he was still influenced by my playing fast that encouraged him to also maybe not be as careful as he could have been in converting this position. So after rook takes d5, king e7 was not the best. King to c8 staying with this b pawn would have been better. But the reason king e7 is not the best is actually not very obvious. So the game continued with b6, knight c4. And knight c4 is really my primary resource in this position because it attacks e3, it puts some pressure here, and of course it defends a5. And so after bishop f4 was played, and it gives me the option to actually play knight takes b6 if I really just want to fight for a draw. Rook takes a5 and something like rook a8. So rook takes here had a tempo on my bishop, something like rook a8, also against rook a7, and trade and takes, and I'm just trying to draw this position. So I was looking at something like this in the game. I didn't really want to do it. I thought that actually I could kind of hold this b pawn a little bit by just playing a4. You can see that the question marks say I'm wrong, and you can see that I made that move. If I have 34 seconds now, it means I made that move with 4 seconds. So, it was a tough decision, but it was a decision I made nonetheless that to just kind of keep fighting. I thought I could hold this b pawn, because if b7, which looks like b8 is imminent, but I thought I had this move bishop to d6. Thought I had this move bishop to d6, and it was the reason actually why I decided not to put my king there, is because I thought I could put my king here, and I'd have bishop to d6 at any point to control the queening square. I could play rook b8, and then my a pawn would actually maybe be kind of dangerous, and I don't really care about the g7 pawn in the grand scheme of things. And it looks like with bishop to d6, I'm doing quite well. b8 seems quite under control. If you take it, knight takes, and there's a lot of pressure. And rook to b8, and I could probably eliminate that pawn. However, there's this brilliant move that we both missed, that white has in this position, and I'll actually give you guys the opportunity to pause the video if you'd like, to recommend a move for white. The brilliant move for white is knight to d4, using this little box that the king is actually in. And if we take this, knight to c6 check, and the king will be forced to the back rank. King f7, only move, rook d7. King gets forced to the back rank. After it's rook d8 check, will take the rook, and then, just promote the pawn and just be up a rook. So, knight to d4, absolutely nasty move. Preparing knight c6 anyway, so you can imagine here it's just like a3. White can just trade, knight to c6 check, and b8, and win my rook. So knight d4 was missed by both, but this is the type of position that, if you have an hour on the clock, this is where you got to spend your time. And my opponent found a different idea, but did not spend enough time to check it over, as probably should have, and I got unbelievably lucky in this position. After a4, my opponent played the move knight d8. It was something I had looked at for a moment, this idea of knight d8, trading everything. Ooh, my goodness. Trading everything, and then just going with this pawn. However, something I had also noticed was that I can take this knight, b7, looks like b8's imminent, but I have this move, check. It is check, and I can come back bishop a7. Crazy ending to this game here, because so this position is just like plus 0.5. I fought my way back into this game. I have the chance here to play knight takes b6 and really have excellent drawing chances with rook a8. Instead, I play a4, which blunders it all again. Now it's plus 4 again, because of this incredible resource knight d4, which is so not easy to see, but you got the time on your clock. You got to be looking for those things. But yeah, wow. So my opponent plays here knight d8, take, b7, and I was like, oh my goodness, I can go check now. And bishop back to a7. I can cover the queening square, and after promotion, this I'm now up a pawn, and not only am I up a pawn, but it's a very good pawn, because a3, this bishop, this is the only way it can catch it, right? Is catching this dark square, but I can actually take away bishop to d4 with this maneuver, and bishop cannot even get on this diagonal anyway to stop it at all. You can imagine here king d1, also not close enough, and so in this position my opponent resigned. Wow. Wow. I was winning for since about 0.1% of that game, but it was the last 0.1% that my opponent played this move knight to d8. I was able to take the knight, and the pawn does not have a clear road to the end. In fact, my pawn has a clear road to the end in this position. So, wow, I really had no words after that. I mean, my opponent was distressed. I said a couple of things to him after about how unbelievably well he played, how well he outplayed me, and I pointed to his clock, and it was just like, you had the time, you just gotta use it. But really brilliant kid, because he had me at a number of points. The starting from the opening, man. This was just such a wake up call for me to get my headspace. For me to get in a better headspace. But yeah, starting with the opening, I wasn't prepared for it. I had a lot of hubris really to take this pawn. And then yeah, this just kind of went south pretty quickly. But it was just I was kicking myself like for not finding queen c7, for not playing bishop c7, bishop c5. But the position just sucks. the opening, like this position, it's just so difficult to play for where black's pieces can go, for where black's king can go, and really for white, it's just so simple. And I can understand why this is considered to be a very poisonous pawn to capture. And then yeah, from here on out, I was really just trying to survive. Fortunately for me, I was able to do that, and I got myself back into an end game where we could hang on. And wow, I mean, I still, even now, I've looked at Knight D8 so many times. I've looked at this position a number of times. I still have no words for how lucky I got and how unfortunate that is for my opponent and how many times I've been there. I think I did well, trying to defend a lost position, but I, this was really as good as this could have gone for me, I would say, because I got a wake up call and I also got to start the tournament 4 out of 4. So yes, I think this put me in a better situation going forward. I think I learned so much from this game, and that you guys will see my chess in the rest of the games that I was both able to play confidently as I had learned from the first few rounds, but also not severely underestimate my opponent at the same time. And yeah, wow, what a game! What a game! It's hard to say much more about this, but yeah. So I'll see you guys for round 5. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.